Dutch people are full of surprises, and in this video I'm going to share 4 things that have surprised me and continue to surprise me about Dutch people. The first surprise regarding Dutch people is the diversity and the demographics. The diversity and the demographics. Now, if you can't tell, okay, I know the light's hitting me, but I'm a black man and I have black family members. Whenever my black family members learn that I am in the Netherlands, or whenever any black friends, or really any people of color at all that I associate with, learn that I am in the Netherlands, one of the main questions that they ask me is, are there any black people there? Are there any black people in the Netherlands? And I'm not gonna lie, for the first few weeks that I was here, my answer was a resounding no. I genuinely thought I was one of the only black people in this whole country, or at the very least in this whole city that I live in. But as time has passed, I found this to be very far from the truth. Now, it's a very distinct possibility that I might be the only African American black person in this city that I live in. And if not that, then I'm willing to bet money that I am the only half African American, half Filipino person who lives in this city. But if we're just talking about race as a whole, not ethnicity, there are black people here. Now, they do constitute a very small percentage of the population, but at the same time, the diversity amongst those black people, when you take ethnicity into account, and not just black people, but people of color in general, when you consider the ethnicities that you see, I almost feel like it's more diverse than the city that I came from in the US, in the DFW metropolitan area. Here, you'll see black people from Suriname, a country that I had literally never heard of before I moved here. Suriname is in South America, I believe. You have black people from the ABC Islands. I honestly don't know how to pronounce them, but they're somewhere off of the coast, the east coast of South America, I believe. Maybe near the Caribbean, I could be wrong about that, but just know they're in that general area. And then you have people from East African countries. I honestly don't know which ones, but maybe Ethiopia, Somalia, countries like that. And then you have Turkish people, people from maybe Algeria. Honestly, I don't know the full extent of the ethnical diversity, but I know that there are people from countries that I had never previously heard of, much less visited, before I came here. And so coming here, not only am I being exposed to Dutch culture, traditional Dutch culture. Oh, Moroccans, I forgot about Moroccan people. There are a lot of Moroccan people here as well. And Asian people, people from China, people from other Asian countries, etc. It's a very diverse place. So not only have I been exposed to traditional Dutch culture, but I've also been exposed to all of these other microcultures, if you will. So the diversity and the demographics, that is the first thing that has surprised me about Dutch people in particular. The next thing that has surprised me regarding Dutch people is the level of friendliness. And when I say friendliness, I basically mean that Dutch people are much more outgoing than I assumed they would be. You see, when I moved here, I was under the assumption that Dutch people were going to be very cold, callous, they weren't outgoing, didn't interact with strangers. And this is true to an extent. This is definitely true for some people, but I would actually say per capita, on a per capita basis. And this is just my anecdotal experience. Yours may or may not align with mine, but I would go as far as to say that Dutch people are probably more outgoing than people back home in Texas, which I know sounds mind-blowing because Texans are some of the most outgoing and social people that you'll ever encounter on this planet. But I also feel like at times some of that outgoingness can feel like a facade when you're on the receiving end of it. And actually, I'm gonna go ahead and walk this way. Never been down this street before, but I feel like in some cases that Southern friendliness that I'm accustomed to feels very fake, for lack of a better term. But here, I feel like the friendliness, or maybe not friendliness, the niceness of people, the politeness of people is authentic, and it doesn't really overstep any personal boundaries. So one example of people's niceness and politeness is in how they greet strangers. I assumed that this would be one of those countries, just like most other cold places, literally physically cold places on the planet, and dense places on the planet where there are a lot of people in a very small land area. I assumed that this would be the kind of place where if you're walking down the sidewalk and you see somebody, you don't make eye contact with them, you don't say hello, you just mind your business and keep it moving. Now, truthfully, as an introvert, I can't say that I would dislike that, but that is simply not the case here. Here, what I've noticed, especially amongst older people, is that when you see somebody walking down the sidewalk, they're going to expect you to make that eye contact. They're going to not only give you that little head nod, that awkward head nod, but they're also going to say hoi or hello or something to that effect. And of course, if you're somebody who values the social reciprocity of being a human, you're naturally going to give that back to them. You're going to return that greeting or salutation. Another example of this that I touched on in a recent video is the saying fijne avond, which is basically Dutch for good evening or have a good evening. And this is something that people say to complete strangers, even if they're not conversing with them. And that, for me, has been absolutely mind-blowing, because I'm not accustomed to just telling people have a good night or have a good evening. I said this in that same video that I just mentioned, but I don't even tell my family members or friends good night or good evening. It's just not something that we do. It's not the way that our connection is. We don't really exchange the pleasantries and the salutations and all of that. So to come to this country and be thrust into that has been a major adjustment for me. But at the same time, I understand that it's coming from a good place, and I have made a point to reciprocate that back to people who extend that invitation to me. And it hasn't been easy because, once again, I'm an introvert, hardcore introvert at that, with mild social anxiety. I don't even like filming these videos out in public like this. I literally do this just for people like you who want to see the scenery that provides the context for what I'm saying. But I have slowly but surely integrated this into my social package, if you will. I don't know of a better way to articulate that. And I will say that whenever I'm feeling down, or maybe if I suddenly remember that I am in a foreign country, it's nice to receive that type of positivity and to have those interactions, even if those interactions are with people that I will probably never ever see again. Now, something that has surprised me about Dutch people is the level of pessimism about the Netherlands. Now, if you're Dutch, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, you might be writing a hate comment, disliking the video, but you know that what I'm saying is true. Dutch people tend to be very pessimistic about the Netherlands. Some of the things that I noticed that Dutch people are pessimistic about in particular are the safety and the weather. Okay, so let me just be blunt with you. The Netherlands is probably one of the safest countries. I have no statistics to back this up, by the way. This is just anecdotal experience. The Netherlands is probably one of the safest countries that you can be in the entire world. I have yet to see a neighborhood here that made me feel even the slightest bit of unease. And maybe there are some neighborhoods here where the crime rate is higher relative to the rest of the country, but I'll say this. Coming from the US, places like Baltimore, New Orleans, Memphis, St. Louis, south side of Chicago, south central LA, places like that literally don't exist here. They literally do not exist. So again, I can see how if you're born and raised in the Netherlands, in, I don't know, Utrecht or somewhere like that, that maybe if there's a murder or a robbery, that might be groundbreaking news to you. And you might say, okay, we need to get this together. We need to get our community back in check. But compared to parts of the US, murder, robbery, these are literally daily occurrences. Okay, there are people who die and don't even make the news. People who get shot, bodies left in ditches like this one, and don't even make the news. I'm saying this to say that it's all relative. And I believe that and the weather, the pessimism about these aspects of the Netherlands, which I'll be the first to admit the weather here is pretty shitty, but not nearly as bad as back home in Texas. I will take Dutch weather over Texas weather 8 days a week, 25 hours a day. Yes, Texas weather is that bad. The pessimism surrounding these topics makes it a lot easier to enact change, to enact positive change, or at the very least to make the most out of the conditions that are in front of us. What do I mean by that? Well, it rains a lot here, so what do Dutch people do? They take advantage of that. First, they're aware that it rains and that, hey, that kind of sucks. But at the same time, a lot of times you'll see these fields and these farms and these canals and ditches and things of that nature that take advantage of the abundance of water here. And maybe I'm not articulating this in the best way possible, but basically what I'm saying is that the pessimism surrounding certain aspects of day-to-day life in the Netherlands allows for this high quality of life to exist. Because it's only when you begin to accept subpar conditions as your reality that they truly become your reality, and you no longer have a means or the inspiration to change them. So this pessimism, even though it might seem on the surface like complaining, is actually, in my opinion, very, very productive. Now, the next thing that I've noticed about Dutch people that has really surprised me is, I'm actually going to turn around so I don't get hit by this car, but the next thing that I've noticed about Dutch people that has really surprised me is the level of humility. The people here are very, very humble. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, when I say that they're humble, basically, if you just look at the background of my videos, it's very rare that you will see things that stand out. And there's this saying in Dutch culture that goes something along the lines of "doe normaal" and that's good enough. I don't know the rest of the saying in Dutch, but the core of the statement is "doe normaal," which means act normal and that is good enough, or that's crazy enough. Like I said, forgot the rest of the statement, but "doe normaal," act normal. People here live by that. Whether they agree with it or not, they live by it. And because of that, fewer people, I've noticed, are striving to get to the top, and those that are don't make it as obvious or apparent that they're striving to get to the top or that they are at the top. What I mean is that in day-to-day life, it's very rare that you'll see somebody with a Richard Mille watch, or driving a Rolls Royce, or displaying their status outwardly. It's very rare that you see that. And even on a less extreme scale, I noticed that at the gym, I rarely see people wearing revealing clothing that actually shows off their gains. I believe that when people at the gym are less inclined to show off all of the hard work that they've put in, that's indicative of an underlying psychological belief that people have about showing off. And from what I understand, I've yet to see a real world example of this, but from what I understand, showing off is seen as extremely distasteful in Dutch culture. And I've heard that this has to do with the religious roots of how the Netherlands was developed as a country. I don't know, I wasn't there. But what I do know is that you don't see a lot of super flashy cars. You especially don't see really any sort of extravagant jewelry. That's something that I literally haven't seen at all since I got here. Haven't seen anybody wearing Cuban link chain or a bust down AP or anything like that, diamond encrusted. Haven't seen any of that here. Back home in Texas, that is, if not a daily occurrence, a weekly occurrence. If you're going out at all in any sort of environment with a lot of people, you are going to see people flaunting what they have. It's just the culture. But here, people tend to lean more toward practicality than flashiness. Now, I'm not saying this is better or worse, but it is different and it's apparent. It's something that literally is unavoidable in terms of how you perceive the country and how you will then, by extension, perceive your home country if where you come from doesn't operate this way. The lack of flashy cars and jewelry and the lack of mansions that span half a city block. Again, I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it's definitely different. It's noticeable. And I feel like because people are less inclined to strive for these status symbols, the average person lives better. The average person lives better because fewer people are trying to take up the majority of the resources. Now, that's a whole different discussion for a whole different day, but I do find that the humility of Dutch people is very, very inspiring. Ironically, you would think that the status symbols and the people striving to literally dominate everyone else socially would be the bigger source of inspiration. But I find that the way that Dutch people are content with living simple lives has proven to be far more inspirational for me. And it's something that I hope to embed within my psyche as I continue my journey through the Netherlands and wherever else is to follow. So if you've made it to this point in the video, then clearly you are very interested in the topic of becoming a digital nomad so that you can travel the world like I do. And if that's the case, be sure to follow me on Instagram at greenxjordan. I have a link in the description and the pinned comment. Follow me on Instagram because I have a major announcement coming very, very soon, exclusively on Instagram and exclusively for people like you who are into the digital nomad / travel lifestyle. Follow me as soon as you possibly can so that you don't miss this exclusive announcement.